Leave the vintage port and vanish." The billionaire's voice was a low growl, a predator's rumble that vibrated through the polished mahogany. He gestured with a flick of his wrist, a dismissive wave meant for a servant, a ghost. The entire private dining room of Ethelgard's, a sanctuary of old money perched atop a Chicago skyscraper, fell into a hush. Sterling Vance, a man who didn't just own buildings but entire skylines, believed he was a modern-day emperor. He smirked as the young waitress, Ilara, flinched, her hand trembling slightly as she set down the crystal decanter. He'd called her clumsy. He'd called her background into question. But when his private, encrypted line began to chime, a call that held the key to acquiring a priceless art collection and cementing his dynasty, Sterling's confidence became a brittle facade. He couldn't decipher the elegant, poetic Mandarin spoken by the elderly patriarch on the other end. He never expected Ilara to stop polishing a nearby silver tray. He never expected her to clear her throat softly. And he certainly never expected the 3 words she would later speak in a flawless, classical dialect. 3 words that would unravel his empire, expose a decades-old lie, and force a titan of industry to his knees. Ethelgard's was not merely a restaurant, it was a time capsule. It existed on the 80th floor of the Vance Tower, a monument to Sterling Vance's ego, but its soul was rooted in a bygone era of European aristocracy. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax, old leather, and the quiet arrogance of inherited wealth. To work there was to agree to be a phantom, a pair of hands without a face, a silent witness to the machinations of the powerful. Ilara adjusted the starched, suffocating collar of her black uniform, the fabric chafing a small burn on her wrist from where a sputtering pan of oil had spat at her in the kitchen of her second job earlier that day. She saw her reflection in the gilded frame of a somber oil painting, a pale, tired young woman of 20, with eyes that held a depth of knowledge that didn't belong in these halls. Her posture, however, was impeccable, a straight-backed defiance drilled into her by her grandmother. At Ethelgard's, you didn't just carry trays, you carried the weight of expectation. You were to be invisible, swift, and utterly deaf to the whispers that could topple markets. "The Vance party? Alcove 3, Ilara," hissed Mr. Albright, the floor manager, a man whose spine seemed to be made of gelatin. He thrust a wine list bound in Moroccan leather at her. "And for God's sake, be perfect. Mr. Vance is closing the Chen acquisition tonight. If he so much as frowns in your direction, you'll be cleaning bus station bathrooms by morning. Am I clear?" Ilara nodded, her fingers curling around the heavy menu. "Perfectly, Mr. Albright." "Who is he meeting?" she asked, a formality she knew was pointless. Albright's thin lips twisted into a smirk. The man himself, Sterling Vance. A cold knot formed in Ilara's stomach. The name was more than just a brand. It was a ghost story in her family. Sterling Vance, the real estate magnate, the art collector, the man who had built his first great success on the ruins of her grandfather's import-export business 30 years ago. He was infamous for his brutal negotiations and his cruel habit of finding a single, insignificant flaw in an employee and exploiting it for his own amusement. Tonight's dinner was the culmination of a year-long pursuit. The acquisition of the Chen collection, a legendary trove of classical Chinese scrolls and artifacts that had been held by the same family for over 400 years. The media portrayed it as a brilliant business move. Ilara knew it was grave robbery disguised as commerce. "I will be discreet," she promised, her voice a low murmur. She couldn't afford to be fired. Her grandmother, Mei Lin, was in a private nursing facility, the kind with skilled nurses and clean sheets, and its cost was astronomical. The tips from Ethelgard's were the difference between her grandmother's comfort and a state-run facility that smelled of despair. Ilara needed this job. She had to swallow her history, her anger, her pride. She moved onto the floor, the thick Persian rug muffling the sound of her sensible, worn-out shoes. Alcove 3 was the most coveted table. A semi-private room with a breathtaking floor-to-ceiling view of Lake Michigan, a vast, dark mirror reflecting the city's glittering lights. Sterling Vance was there, flanked by two younger men in identical charcoal suits who radiated nervous energy. Vance was in his late 60s, handsome in a severe, predatory way, with silver hair swept back from his temples and eyes the color of a winter sky. He was scrolling through his phone, a portrait of bored omnipotence. Ilara approached, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. "Good evening, Mr. Vance, gentlemen. My name is Ilara, and I will be your server this evening. May I begin with some water for the table?" Vance didn't look up. "Still, Welsh. No ice. And if one drop of it is condensation on the outside of the glass, you'll bring me another. And another. Until you get it right. Now go." He waved his hand, a gesture of supreme dismissal. The two associates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ilara bowed her head slightly, the familiar taste of bitterness on her tongue. "Of course, Mr. Vance." As she turned away, she heard his voice, loud and laced with condescension. "The key to dealing with these old Chinese families, boys, is pageantry. You flatter their history, you pretend to understand their dusty old proverbs, you throw a lot of money at them. Old man Chen thinks he's passing on a legacy. He has no idea I'm buying his family's soul to be the centerpiece of my new penthouse lobby." Ilara's hand tightened into a fist at her side. The ignorance was more offensive than the cruelty. Her grandfather had taught her about those scrolls. He had held replicas, his hands trembling with reverence, and explained the meaning of every brushstroke. He had taught her that art was not a possession. It was a conversation with history. Sterling Vance wanted to turn that conversation into wallpaper. She retrieved the water, her hands steady despite the storm raging inside her. She knew a secret that Sterling Vance, in all his power and wealth, could never comprehend. She knew that true value couldn't be bought, and that a man who respects nothing is the easiest man to fool. The service was a meticulously choreographed exercise in humiliation. Vance complained that his steak knife was insufficiently serrated. He sent back a glass of wine, claiming he detected a note of desperation from the vineyard. With every visit to the table, he found a new way to diminish her. He criticized the way she refilled his water glass. He commented on the unfortunate brand of her shoes. At one point, he asked her to name the artist of the oil painting behind him. "It's a reproduction of a work by John Singer Sargent, sir," she answered quietly. Vance laughed. "A reproduction? How fitting. A fake in a room full of them." He looked directly at her. "This is what happens when you don't aim high enough in life, boys. You end up a talking plaque." The heat in Ilara's cheeks was scorching. It was a cocktail of shame, fury, and a profound, aching grief for the grandfather he had ruined. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him that her grandfather, a humble immigrant, had forgotten more about art and honor than Vance would ever know. But she saw her grandmother's face, pale and trusting, and she swallowed the words like shards of glass. "Is everything to your satisfaction, sir?" Ilara asked, her voice a perfect monotone of professional deference. Vance ignored her, his attention fixed on his phone. His brow was creased in annoyance. "Where is my translator? It's 9 o'clock. Chen is calling any minute." One of the associates, a young man named Harris, cleared his throat. "Sir, Mr. Dubois had a fender bender on the Kennedy Expressway. He's stuck. He said he'll be at least another hour." Vance slammed his palm on the table, rattling the silverware. Ilara took an involuntary step back. "An hour!" he roared, his voice echoing in the alcove. Heads turned in the main dining room. "I don't have an hour. The final call with Chen is now. He wants to discuss the inscription on the Whispering Bamboo scroll before he signs the final papers. If I don't take the call, he'll see it as a sign of disrespect. If I take it and can't understand his archaic, literary nonsense, he'll know I'm a fraud. Do you have any idea how much is at stake here, Harris?" "I'm very sorry, sir," Harris stammered, shrinking in his chair. "Sorry doesn't buy me a 400-year-old dynasty," Vance snarled. He raked a hand through his perfect silver hair, his composure finally cracking. "Chen doesn't speak simple Mandarin on these calls. It's classical, poetic. He does it to weed out the culturally illiterate. He thinks it's a sign of a refined mind. If I can't match his tone, if I misinterpret one of his flowery metaphors, he'll pull out." Ilara stood in the shadows by a service station, holding a silver coffee pot. A memory surfaced, as clear and vivid as the view from the window. The scent of ink and sandalwood in her grandfather's small study. The feel of the worn bamboo brush in her hand. The rainy Sunday afternoons spent meticulously copying lines of Tang Dynasty poetry. Her grandfather patiently explaining the layers of meaning, the historical context, the philosophy embedded in a single character. He had called it their secret language, a bridge to a world that men like Sterling Vance could never touch. She knew that language. She knew it more intimately than she knew the menu at Ethelgard's. Vance's phone began to ring, a sharp, custom chime. The screen displayed 2 characters, Chen Long. Vance stared at the device as if it were a cobra poised to strike. "Damn it all! Put it on speaker. I'll try to wing it. Maybe he's in a modern mood tonight." He tapped the screen. "Mr. Chen, what a pleasure. A wonderful evening to you." A voice, old and resonant, crackled from the speaker. It was slow, deliberate, and steeped in a formality that was almost musical. And it was not English. "Vance Jiansheng," the voice began, using a respectful honorific. "The moon hangs full over the lake tonight, a perfect pearl. It reminds me of the poet Li Bai, who wrote of reaching for its reflection. I trust you are not merely reaching for reflections tonight." Vance's smile was a frozen, panicked grimace. "Ah, yes, Mr. Chen, the moon. A very full moon indeed. The papers are all in order. Excellent papers." The voice on the phone continued, its cadence becoming more complex, weaving in allusions to ancient scholars and painters. It was a test of cultural fluency, a delicate dance of intellect and respect, and Sterling Vance had 2 left feet. The scroll known as Whispering Bamboo carries an inscription by the artist Zheng Xie, Mr. Chen stated. He speaks of the bamboo's resilience, its ability to bend without breaking. He asks, "Does the ink remember the storm? What is your interpretation of this, Vance Jiansheng? What does the ink remember?" Vance looked at his associates in desperation. What did he say? Something about ink and a storm? "I think he's asking for your opinion on the art, sir," Harris whispered unhelpfully. "I know that, you idiot," Vance hissed back. He leaned toward the phone. "Mr. Chen, a fascinating question. The connection is poor." "Could you repeat?" Mr. Chen's voice lost a fraction of its warmth. "There is no issue with the connection. The question is one of philosophy. A man who wishes to be the guardian of my ancestors' art should have a philosophy." He then launched into a complex verse, a quote so obscure it would only be known to a dedicated scholar. It was about the difference between ownership and stewardship. Sterling Vance was drowning in a sea of eloquent, indecipherable words. His face was flushed, beads of sweat forming on his brow. He was about to lose the deal of a lifetime because of a traffic jam and a 2,000-year-old poem. He muted the call. I need a translator. Now. Find anyone in this restaurant, this building, who speaks this gibberish. I'll pay $50,000 to anyone who can get me through the next 10 minutes. The associates leaped to their feet, their eyes scanning the other tables filled with Chicago's elite, overwhelmingly white and monolingual. Elara stood frozen, the coffee pot still in her hand. $50,000. It wasn't just her grandmother's care for a year. It was a new life. It was freedom from the crushing weight of debt and fear. But it was for him, the man who had destroyed her family and sneered at her for sport. She looked at his face, a mask of desperate, ugly greed. Then she looked at the phone. She took a single, deliberate step forward. I can translate, sir, Elara said. Her voice was quiet, but in the panicked silence of the alcove, it landed with the force of a gavel. Vance's head snapped around. His eyes, wide and frantic, took her in. The cheap uniform, the tired face, the coffee pot. He let out a harsh, incredulous bark of a laugh. You? He sneered. The waitress? What are you going to do? Offer him the dessert special in broken Mandarin? Get back to your station. I speak Mandarin, Mr. Vance, Elara said, her voice gaining a cold, clear edge. And I understand the literary dialect he is using. He is not asking about the ink. He is asking if you understand that the art's value comes from the suffering and perseverance it represents. He is asking if you are worthy of its story. Vance stopped laughing. He stared at her, his jaw slack. The phone was still emitting the low, resonant hum of an open line. You understood that? He just quoted the final lines of the Ode to the Autumn Wind by Emperor Wu of Han, Elara continued calmly. He is implying that all great things are transient, and that if you cannot answer his question in the next 30 seconds, this conversation and your acquisition will become a memory. He is hanging up. Vance's face went white. The Ode to the Autumn Wind was a masterpiece of classical literature. There was no way a waitress from Chicago could know that unless she understood every nuanced syllable Mr. Chen had uttered. He shoved the phone across the table toward her. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by the raw, desperate hunger of a cornered animal. Talk to him, fix it, save this deal, and the 50,000 is yours. Do it. Elara placed the coffee pot on the table with a soft, metallic click. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a brief second. In that darkness, she wasn't Elara. The waitress? She was Elara Chen, granddaughter of Chen Wei, the girl who had spent her childhood learning the language of emperors and poets. She leaned over the phone. Chen Loxiansheng, Wan Bei Shili, she began. Her voice was transformed. Gone was the submissive whisper of a server. In its place was a voice of quiet authority, pitched low and resonant, flowing with the liquid grace of the classical dialect. Mr. Chen, this humble junior apologizes for the discourtesy. Mr. Vance's translator was unavoidably detained. I am his cultural consultant. I will answer your question regarding the ink. There was a profound silence from the other end of the line. Then a low, intrigued murmur. Your accent. It is pure. The cadence of old Beijing. Who taught you? Wo Dezufu, Elara replied smoothly. My grandfather. Regarding the ink of Zhang Xie, my grandfather taught me that it does not remember the storm. It is the storm. It is the artist's struggle, his defiance against a corrupt world, captured forever. The value is not in the bamboo's resilience, but in the honesty of the artist who chose to paint its struggle. For the next 10 minutes, the opulent restaurant faded away. Elara became a bridge between two worlds. She translated Chen's philosophical inquiries into plain, actionable English for Vance, and she transformed Vance's crude, business-focused replies into elegant, respectful prose for Chen. She debated the symbolism of a crane in a Ming dynasty vase. She discussed the political implications of a landscape scroll from the Southern Song period. She navigated the intricate cultural tapestry that Vance had intended to bulldoze. Vance watched, his mouth agape. He saw the way her posture had changed, the way she used subtle hand gestures as she spoke, as if conversing with an old friend. She was no longer a servant. She was a scholar, a diplomat, a force of nature in a cheap polyester uniform. Finally, the old voice on the phone softened, a warmth returning to it. "Hen Hao, very good. Vance Xiansheng, you are a man of hidden depths, or you have the wisdom to hire those who possess them. The terms are acceptable. We will sign tomorrow." The line went dead. The silence in the alcove was absolute. Harris and the other associate were staring at Elara as if she had just sprouted wings. Vance leaned back in his chair, a long, shuddering breath escaping his lips. He ran a hand over his face, wiping away the sweat. The deal was saved. His legacy was secure. He looked at Elara, the relief in his eyes quickly being shouldered aside by his returning arrogance. He had won. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a checkbook. He scribbled furiously, tore out the check, and slid it across the table. It stopped near the base of the coffee pot. 50,000, Vance said, his voice regaining its smug, dismissive tone. "You earned your tip. I'm impressed. I didn't realize they had such a robust arts program at the local community college." He chuckled, glancing at his associates, who offered weak, sycophantic smiles. "You can go now," Vance said, waving his hand again. "And send a bottle of the 59 Lafitte. We have a legacy to celebrate." Elara looked at the check. Then she looked at Sterling Vance. He hadn't learned a thing. He thought he had purchased her knowledge, that the transaction was complete. But then the phone rang again. Vance frowned. "It's Chen. What now? Did he forget to ask about the wine pairings?" He hit the speakerphone button. "Mr. Chen, to what do we owe the pleasure?" The voice that came through was not the warm, poetic one from before. It was cold, sharp, and terrifyingly clear, and it was speaking perfect, unaccented English. "Mr. Vance," Chen said, "my aide did a quick search on your cultural consultant. Her Mandarin was too familiar. Her story about her grandfather. It sparked a memory." Vance looked at Elara, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "She's just a waitress I hired on the spot. A bright girl." "She is not just a waitress, Mr. Vance," Chen said, his voice like chipping ice. "Do you know whose granddaughter is standing at your table?" Vance rolled his eyes. "Does it matter?" "It matters a great deal," Chen said. "Ask her. Ask her to translate one final phrase for me. A message from my past to yours." Vance glared at Elara, his patience gone. What is he babbling about? What's the message? Translate it. Elara didn't look at the phone. She stood straight, her hands clasped behind her back, and looked directly into Sterling Vance's cold blue eyes. For the first time all night, she let the mask of the servant fall away, revealing the proud, intelligent woman beneath. She spoke 3 words in Mandarin, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of 30 years of injustice. "Yujishan." Vance blinked. "What? What does that mean? Translate it." Elara held his gaze. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "It's not for you to understand. It was for him. She turned her head slightly toward the phone. It means, the jade remembers the mountain. On the other end of the line, there was a sharp intake of breath. So it is you, Mr. Chen whispered in English. Wei's granddaughter. He told me that phrase before he died, a code we arranged, to be used only if his legacy was ever in the hands of a thief. Vance's blood ran cold. He looked from the phone to Ilara, comprehension dawning in his eyes like a dark, sickening sunrise. Mr. Vance, Ilara said, her voice now ringing with the clarity of a bell, speaking English for the whole table to hear. The jade was my grandfather's nickname for my grandmother. The mountain was what he called his business, the one you drove into bankruptcy, with false contracts and corporate espionage, the business whose assets you absorbed to build your first tower. You lying little witch, Vance screamed, lunging for the phone as if he could physically stop the words. The deal is off, Mr. Vance, Chen's voice boomed from the speaker. I do not do business with men who build their empires on the graves of honorable merchants. I will not have my family's history displayed as a trophy by a common criminal. The line clicked dead. Vance stood frozen, his face a mottled canvas of purple and white. Billions of dollars, the crown jewel of his collection, his reputation, all gone, evaporated by 3 little words from a waitress. He turned to face her, his body trembling with a rage so profound it was silent. He loomed over her, his fists clenched at his sides. Do you have any idea what you've just done? He whispered, his voice a venomous hiss. I will ruin you. I will sue you into oblivion. I will ensure you never work in this city again. You will be homeless. You will be nothing. Who in God's name do you think you are? Ilara reached out and picked up the $50,000 check. She held it between her thumb and forefinger, looked Sterling Vance dead in the eye, and slowly, deliberately, tore it in 2. She let the pieces flutter from her fingers onto his half-eaten steak. My name is Ilara Chen, she said, her voice quiet but unbreakable. I am the granddaughter of Chen Wei, and I am the storm the ink remembers. She untied the apron from around her waist, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table next to the ruined check. I quit. The aftermath of Ilara's departure was not an explosion, but a chilling implosion. Sterling Vance did not shout or throw things. He simply sank into his chair, his face ashen, and stared at the 2 pieces of the check lying on his plate. The ink from his signature was beginning to bleed into the steak juices. A quiet, methodical rage settled over him, far more dangerous than any tantrum. Security, he murmured to Harris, his voice barely audible. Find her. Don't let her leave this building. But Ilara was already a ghost. She had bypassed the locker rooms and the gossiping staff, taking a freight elevator down 80 floors. She slipped out a service exit into a cold, wind-swept Chicago alley. The biting November air felt like a baptism, washing away the cloying, artificial atmosphere of the restaurant. Adrenaline coursed through her, a volatile mix of terror and exhilarating freedom. She ran, her worn shoes slapping against the wet pavement, not stopping until her lungs burned and a stitch flared in her side. She finally leaned against the cold brick wall of an old theater, gasping for breath as the full weight of her actions crashed down upon her. She had publicly humiliated one of the most vindictive men in America. She had cost him a fortune, and, more importantly, his pride. And she had revealed her identity, linking herself directly to the one man Sterling Vance had a reason to truly hate. Foolish, she whispered, sliding down the wall to sit on the damp concrete. So utterly foolish. Her phone vibrated in her apron pocket, which she realized she was still wearing. It was a text alert from her bank. Her balance was 2010 hours to 34 hours. A moment later, an email arrived from the director of the Oakhaven Senior Care Facility. Subject: urgent account review. The message was polite but firm, informing her that due to a recent policy change, all resident accounts must be paid in full 3 months in advance to guarantee their place. The new balance of $24,000 was due by the end of the week. Elara stared at the screen. The glowing numbers a death sentence for her grandmother's well-being. She had just torn up $50,000. Honor felt wonderful for a moment, but it wouldn't keep her grandmother in a safe, clean room. Justice didn't pay for 24-hour nursing care. By the time Elara took the train back to her small suburban apartment, a bone-deep weariness had set in. She found her grandmother, Mei Lin, sitting in her favorite armchair, a soft blanket over her lap, practicing calligraphy on a sheet of rice paper. Mei Lin was frail, her body weakened by age and a failing heart, but her hands were steady, and her eyes, the same intelligent, observant eyes Elara possessed, were sharp. "You are home late, little bird," Mei Lin said, not looking up from her elegant brush strokes. She looked at Elara's dishevelled state, the haunted look in her eyes. The mountain air was thin tonight. Elara collapsed to her knees, laying her head in her grandmother's lap. In a torrent of whispered words, she recounted the entire evening, the insults, the poetry, the phone call, the 3 words, the torn check. Mei Lin listened without interruption, her free hand gently stroking Elara's hair. When the story was finished, Elara braced herself for a lecture on pragmatism, on the folly of angering a powerful man. Instead, Mei Lin set down her brush and smiled, a fierce, proud expression that lit up her wrinkled face. "Your grandfather would have composed a poem about this night," she said, her voice filled with a strength that defied her frail frame. "He would have said you used their own language, the language of pride, to show them its emptiness." "But Grandma!" Elara cried, her voice muffled by the blanket. "The money, the nursing home. Vance will come for us. He'll destroy us." Mei Lin tilted Elara's chin up, forcing her to meet her gaze. "Let him come," she said, her voice like steel. "He took your grandfather's business, his name. Hi." The silence that fell in alcove 3 was not empty. It was a vacuum, dense and heavy, pulling all the sound and air from the room. Sterling Vance did not erupt. The rage that seized him was a cold thing, a tectonic shift deep beneath the surface of his carefully constructed world. It was the silent, absolute fury of a god who has just witnessed his own effigy toppled and smashed by a mortal. He watched Elara place her folded apron on the table, a final, damning period on a sentence he could not comprehend, and walk away. Her steps were not hurried or triumphant. They were measured, the sound of them on the Persian rug, a quiet, rhythmic repudiation of his entire existence. He did not see a waitress quitting her job. He saw a ghost, his oldest ghost, walking out of a 30-year-old grave to pass judgment. The 2 pieces of the check on his plate, soaking in the juice of a $200 steak, were not just torn paper. They were the 2 halves of his life, the one he had built and the one he had stolen. "Harris," Vance's voice was a dead thing, a rasp of rust and gravel. The young associate flinched as if struck. "Security. Seal the building. I want her found. I want her name, her address, her history. I want to know where she sleeps. I want to know who she loves. I want everything." His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were now the flat, lifeless gray of a frozen lake. "She doesn't exist anymore. Do you understand me?" But Elara was already gone, a phantom who knew the building's secret passages not by design, but by the instinct of the overlooked. She descended 80 floors in a rattling freight elevator that smelled of disinfectant and discarded food, a world away from the beeswax and leather above. She emerged not into the grand lobby, but into a sub-basement corridor, a concrete artery of the tower's hidden life. Pushing through a heavy steel door, she was struck by the raw, wet Chicago wind. It was a physical shock, a brutal baptism that scoured the restaurant's cloying atmosphere from her lungs. She ran, not with the frantic terror of the pursued, but with the desperate, lung-burning need of a deep-sea diver breaking the surface. The city lights blurred into streaks of neon and gold, the sounds of traffic, a chaotic symphony that drowned out the pounding in her ears. She finally stopped in a small, forgotten park, overlooking the dark expanse of Lake Michigan, her body trembling, not from the cold, but from the violent aftershocks of her own audacity. She had done it. She had spoken the words. She had avenged a silence that had stretched for 3 decades. The feeling was not the sweet warmth of victory she might have imagined. It was a cold, sharp, terrifying clarity. She had not merely slain a dragon. She had stood before it, looked it in its eyes, and told it that its hoard of gold was nothing but painted rocks. And now, the dragon knew her name. Her phone buzzed, a mundane intrusion into the epic scale of her thoughts. It was a notification from her bank. Low balance alert, 217.34. A moment later, an email. Subject: Urgent account review. Oakhaven Senior Care. The polite, corporate language detailed a sudden, non-negotiable policy change requiring all accounts to be paid 3 months in advance to secure a resident's place. The new balance due by Friday was $24,000. Elara stared at the glowing screen, the numbers seeming to mock her. She had just performed an act of profound, poetic justice. She had reclaimed her family's honor, and in the real, unforgiving world of bills and policies, it meant nothing. Honor could not pay for her grandmother's medication. Vengeance could not keep a roof over her head. The cold reality settled upon her. She had torn up a check for $50,000, and in doing so, may have just signed her grandmother's eviction notice from the last safe place she had on earth. When she finally arrived at the small, 3rd-floor walk-up apartment she shared with her grandmother, the exhaustion was a physical weight. Maylene was not in her usual chair. She was standing by the window, looking out at the city lights, a silhouette of frail, unbending strength. She turned as Elara entered, her eyes, clouded by age but missing nothing, taking in her granddaughter's disheveled state. "The storm has broken," Maylene said. It was not a question. Elara sank onto the worn sofa, the story tumbling out of her in a torrent of whispered, breathless words. She spoke of Vance's cruelty, of the poetry, of the ghost of her grandfather in her voice, of the torn check fluttering onto the plate. She expected a scolding, a lament for her impulsiveness. Instead, Maylene came and sat beside her, taking Elara's trembling hands in her own, her grip surprisingly firm. "When you were a little girl," Maylene began, her voice soft but resonant, "your grandfather taught you that the most powerful stroke in calligraphy is not the brush moving forward, but the tune, the pause, the moment the brush gathers its ink and its strength before it changes direction. Tonight, you were the tune in Sterling Vance's life. You forced the pause. He has been moving in one direction for so long, he has forgotten that a line can be broken." "But Grandma, I broke us too," Elara whispered, the tears finally coming. "The nursing home, our apartment. He won't stop. He'll erase us." "Let him try," Maylene said, her voice hardening with an ancient resolve. "He thinks he is a mountain. He has forgotten that mountains are worn down, grain, by water and wind, by patience. He has shown you his weapon, Ilara. It is money. It is influence. It is a crude, loud instrument. You have shown him yours. It is memory. It is a quiet, sharp blade. Now we must learn how to wield it." Vance's retaliation was not swift. It was meticulous. It was the work of a master sadist. The next morning, Ilara went to her second job at a small neighborhood bakery. The owner, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, met her at the door, her face pale. Two men in crisp city uniforms were inside, measuring countertops and checking temperatures. "Ilara, I'm so sorry," she whispered, pressing a severance check for $200 into her hand. "An anonymous tip to the health department. They mentioned you by name. Something about a pattern of negligence. They threatened to shut me down for a month if I didn't cooperate. I have a family, Ilara. I couldn't—" Ilara nodded, unable to speak. She understood. This was Vance's art. He wasn't just firing her. He was poisoning the well, making her radioactive. 2 days later, a formal condemnation notice was plastered on their apartment door. A surprise inspection had found critical, long-standing structural deficiencies. They had 72 hours to vacate. The cruelty was in the details. The lie of long-standing, designed to make them feel as though they had been living in squalor all along. She was sitting on a packing box, surrounded by the dismantled geography of her life, when the knock came. It was not a city official. It was a young, composed Asian man in a perfectly tailored suit that seemed out of place in the chaos of their apartment. He held a sleek tablet. "Miss Ilara Chen?" he asked. His English was precise, with the faint transatlantic accent of an international education. "My name is David Lin. I am a senior associate for the Chen Long Consortium. May I have a moment?" Ilara's heart seized. Suspicion, sharp and bitter, rose in her throat. "If Mr. Chen sent you to offer me charity, you can leave. We are not a project." David Lin's expression didn't change, but a flicker of respect entered his eyes. "Mr. Chen does not deal in charity, Miss Chen. He deals in honor, and in debts. He believes a debt of honor was incurred the other night. Not from you to him, but from the world to your family. He was deeply moved by your story, and deeply angered by what his own researchers have since uncovered about Sterling Vance's beginnings. He asked me to come here not to offer, but to listen. He believes that justice, like art, requires a deep understanding of its subject." There was no pity in his voice, only a cool, professional curiosity. It was this, more than anything, that made her trust him. She let him in. For an hour, as Mei Lin sat silently, observing, Ilara laid out the story. Not just the story of that night, but the 30-year story of her family. She brought out her grandfather's journals, the pages filled with his elegant, heartbreaking script detailing Vance's methodical betrayal. David listened, his gaze intense. He scanned pages from the journals with his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen, cross-referencing names and dates with a speed that was almost unnerving. When she had finished, he was silent for a full minute. "Mr. Vance has called an emergency meeting of his board and primary investors for tomorrow afternoon," he said finally, his tone shifting from listener to strategist. "He is framing the failed acquisition as an act of corporate sabotage, perpetrated by a disturbed and vengeful former employee. You. He intends to use the incident to consolidate power, demand a vote of confidence, and launch a billion-dollar lawsuit against you for damages. He is turning your story into his weapon. He is burying my grandfather for a second time," Ilara said, the words tasting like ash. "Mr. Chen believes that a lie of that magnitude cannot be trimmed," David said, rising. It must be uprooted. He has authorized me to provide you with the resources to do so. A team. Specialists. He wants to know, Miss Chen. Where is the route? Ilara's gaze fell upon the last journal of her grandfather, open on the coffee table. Her eyes scanned a passage she had read 100 times, but now saw with newfound clarity. He grows arrogant. He boasts of his Phoenix account, a place where assets are burned to ash and reborn under a new name. He scoffs at digital records. He trusts only paper, a physical ledger. He calls it his book of names. He told me he keeps it in the safest place he knows, not a bank vault, but hidden amongst his art in a climate-controlled storage facility, hidden in a custom crate for a worthless statue he calls the Bronze Horse, a financial document hidden in plain sight as a cultural one. The irony is his private joke. A plan, audacious and terrifying, bloomed in her mind. It's not a route, she said, her voice steady and clear. It's a seed planted 30 years ago, and I know exactly where he buried it. The next 12 hours were a blur of controlled, purposeful action. David Lin's team was not a group of shadowy spies, but something far more effective. A forensic accountant with the demeanor of a bored librarian, a corporate lawyer who spoke in surgically precise clauses, and a quiet logistics expert who seemed to be able to procure blueprints of any building in Chicago. They worked from a sterile, temporary office overlooking the river, a stark contrast to Ilara's cluttered apartment. They didn't offer her comfort. They asked her questions. They treated her not as a victim, but as the primary source, the living archive of Vance's original sin. Her grandfather's journals were analyzed, his words becoming the foundation for a legal strategy of breathtaking audacity. The boardroom of Vance International was Sterling's sanctuary, a glass and steel temple to his own genius, 90 stories in the air. He stood at the head of a vast obsidian table, the city sprawling beneath him like a conquered territory. He was in his element, weaving a narrative of victimhood and resilience. This malicious act, born of a long-held family grudge, was an attack not just on me, but on the very integrity of this company, he said, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. On a massive screen behind him, Ilara's employee photo was displayed, subtly altered to make her look unstable. But we will not be cowed. I am asking this board for a vote of absolute confidence and for the authority to pursue all legal and financial remedies against this individual. A point of order. The voice, calm and amplified by the room's acoustics, cut through his monologue. The double doors of the boardroom swept open. David Lin entered, followed by 2 lawyers carrying sleek leather briefcases, and between them walked Ilara. She wore a simple, charcoal grey sheath dress, her hair pulled back, her face composed. She looked not like a waitress, but like a scholar about to defend her thesis. Vance's face became a mask of pure fury. "Security, remove them. This is a private meeting of the board." "I'm afraid she is entitled to be here," David said, placing a folder on the polished table. As of 8 a.m. this morning, the Qianlong Consortium, through a series of offshore acquisitions, became a 7% minority shareholder in Vance International. This makes Mr. Chen a significant investor. Miss Chen is here today as his legally designated proxy. Per your own corporate bylaws, she has the floor. A wave of shock and confusion rippled through the room. The investors stared, their allegiances suddenly uncertain. Vance was trapped. He had built the cage, and now he was locked inside it with the ghost he thought he had exorcised. "You have 5 minutes, Miss Chen," the chairman of the board said, his voice heavy with reluctance. Ilara walked slowly toward the head of the table, until she stood directly opposite Sterling Vance. She ignored the other faces. Her world contained only him. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice quiet, but carrying an immense weight. "You speak of integrity. Let us speak of history. You are a renowned art collector. Your most prized possessions are kept at the Argus Secure facility, are they not?" Vance sneered. "This is preposterous." "In Vault 7B, to be precise," Ilara continued, her voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "You store a piece there, a 20th century reproduction of a Roman statue titled The Bronze Horse. Its appraised value is less than the annual cost of its storage. An odd investment for a man like you. Unless, of course, its true value is not the statue itself, but its custom-built, reinforced, lead-lined shipping crate." The blood began to drain from Vance's face. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "As a new shareholder," Ilara said, nodding to David, "the Chen Consortium was concerned about the insurance valuations of certain underdocumented assets. We petitioned for, and were granted, an immediate, legally mandated audit this morning." David tapped his tablet. The screen behind Vance flickered, replacing Ilara's photo with a live, high-definition video feed from inside a sterile concrete vault. Two figures in white gloves were standing over a large wooden crate. The name Vance was stenciled on its side. "This is illegal," Vance choked out, lunging for his phone. "Perfectly legal," the lawyer beside David murmured. "Bylaw 27, Section C, regarding shareholder rights to asset verification." On the screen, the auditors carefully pried open the crate and lifted out the unremarkable bronze statue. Then, one of them reached back inside, inserted a tool into a nearly invisible seam, and lifted out a false bottom. Nestled in a bed of crushed velvet lay a thick, black, leather-bound ledger. "The Book of Names," Ilara said, her voice now resonating with 30 years of stolen history. "My grandfather wrote of it in his journal, the Phoenix account, the blueprint of your rebirth." The camera zoomed in on the book as a gloved hand opened it to the first page. The script was a younger, more arrogant version of Vance's own. The entry was dated. The names and numbers were damning. And at the bottom of the page, a single line. Initial seed capital. Full liquidation of Chenwei Imports assets. Net gain, 1.2 wars. A collective, horrified gasp sucked the air from the room. It was the genesis, the original sin of Vance International, laid bare in its founder's own hand. "That's a forgery! A plant!" Vance roared, his voice cracking, his composure shattering into 1,000 pieces. "Is it?" Ilara asked softly. "The FBI's Forensic Accounting Unit is waiting downstairs. They seem very eager to verify its authenticity, along with the IRS, the SEC, and, I believe, a representative from the Swiss Banking Commission who flew in from Zurich last night." Sterling Vance looked around the table, his desperate eyes searching for an ally, a friend, a co-conspirator. He found none. He saw only cold, calculating eyes doing a new kind of math, the math of damage control, of severed ties, of survival. His power had never resided in their loyalty, only in their fear and greed. And in that moment, Ilara had offered them a greater fear, the fear of going down with him. He collapsed into his high-backed leather chair, a king suddenly finding his throne made of dust. He was no longer a titan of industry. He was just a man, a hollowed-out, aging man, exposed and utterly alone. His gaze met Ilara's, and for the first time, there was no anger, no arrogance, no contempt. There was only a blank, uncomprehending terror. The look of a man who has discovered the language he used to command the world is now foreign, and the only person who can translate has just pronounced his doom. Elara took a small step closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper, meant only for him and for the ghosts in the room. "You mocked my language, Mr. Vance. You thought it was a quaint relic, a tool for you to use and discard. But my grandfather taught me that language is not a tool. It is a home. It is a history. It is memory itself." She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting him feel the full weight of his unraveling. "The jade," she said, her voice imbued with a sorrowful, final finality, "has remembered the mountain." 2 weeks later, Elara stood with Mei Lin on the promenade overlooking Lake Michigan. The November wind was sharp, but the sun was bright, glinting off the water. The news cycle had moved on from Sterling Vance's spectacular fall, though the legal proceedings would grind on for years. The Chen Consortium had quietly bought out their condemned apartment building, halting the eviction and starting renovations, giving them a generous stipend to live elsewhere in the meantime. The Oakhaven facility had sent a fawning letter of apology, citing a clerical error and offering Mei Lin free residence for a year. Elara had politely declined. Mr. Chen had offered her a permanent, high-paying position as a cultural liaison, an offer she was still considering. For the first time in her life, she had options. She had a future that was not dictated by debt or fear. Yet, she did not feel triumphant. The rage had subsided, leaving behind a vast, quiet space. She had not brought her grandfather back. She had not erased the years of struggle. "He is in a hospital," Elara said quietly, watching a lone sailboat tack against the wind. "A stroke," they said, the day after the board meeting. "He cannot speak." Mei Lin nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. He spent his life taking things from others, their businesses, their futures, their words. It is a strange and terrible justice that he should lose his own. She turned to Elara, her eyes clear and bright. "You didn't do this for revenge, little bird. Revenge is a fire that consumes the one who lights it. You did this for memory. You did not destroy a man. You corrected a story. His was a loud, false tale, written in ink made of greed. Yours is a quiet, true one, written in the ink your grandfather passed down to you. It will last longer." Elara thought of the scrolls, of the whispering bamboo, and the question that had started it all. "Does the ink remember the storm?" She finally understood the answer. The ink does not just remember the storm. It absorbs it. It becomes it. It transforms the chaos and the fury into a single, elegant, enduring line. Her life, her grandfather's life, their struggle, it was not a tragedy. It was a brushstroke, dark and difficult, but necessary for the masterpiece to be complete. She took her grandmother's hand, the familiar network of veins and bones a map of her own history. The wind whipped a strand of hair across her face, and for the first time, it did not feel like a struggle. It felt like a cleansing breath. The mountain was gone, crumbled into dust and lawsuits, but she was still here, and the view was finally clear.